All right, you guys, welcome to this episode of the Outrun Show with your hosts, Travis,
Justin,
and Jesse,
co-founders of Outrun Parkour, and movers coaches extraordinaire. On this episode, we're talking about the tips for balance in parkour, and the subject of the conversation today is: do we only have a very small window of time in our lives to train and achieve what we want in parkour?
sensitive topic.
Sensitive topic. That answered and more on this episode of The Outrun Show. All right, so let's kick it off. We're talking about balance first, and so balancing on rails, balancing on the at height. What are the tips you guys have for balance? I think that when most of the time we're approaching parkour, balance is super important because anytime you start to introduce height, having control over that, where you're at in height is important. But also, it's one of those skills early on that's like an easy hard skill, in that people look at it, they see someone balancing on a rail, even just inches off the ground, and they try it, and they can't do it for any amount of time. But then over time, usually after just a few weeks of training or even a few months, people can acquire that skill, and it becomes sort of like, it becomes impressive to them because they remember coming in and the frustration of not being able to stand for any amount of time and then growing that. So what are your tips for balance that anyone can use, or when they're getting started with balance? Or maybe somebody's stuck on balance. Fix that. Are you doomed to a poor vestibular system?
Yeah, actually, I feel like you should give a disclaimer to your head injury.
Oh.
Because you have some experience with balance that we don't have.
Yeah.
Because my head's solid, bro.
So, what Jesse's saying is I'm damaged goods, and he's still...
We're damaged goods, okay?
Yeah, right. Not anymore. So I think that I actually, for a long period of time, had when you have your weakest physical link, it shows up when you're sick or weak or tired or don't get enough sleep and whatnot. And for me, I think that's always been balanced to some degree. For some reason, I get dizzy every once in a while. You get headaches.
Yeah.
And what you have inflammation. I don't know what yours is. Like, what goes first consistently?
Yeah, I get from my long hours at a computer. I get carpal tunnel or tendonitis.
Right, little tendonitis stuff.
Yeah, which can affect my grip when I go to do parkour stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, nothing major.
I've done that for years now, so.
But you just know it as you're reading.
I've been counteracting it as much as I can.
But smart people will notice that, and instead of thinking, well, you may be identifying a chronic illness, but instead of just judging it, just using it as an early warning for that you don't. So there's some deficit, not enough sleep, not enough nutrition, too much stress, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. That's how I use it. So when you get your little headaches, you're definitely checking your lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And when I get dizzy or tinnitus or whatever. Anyway, so I had a concussion, which was the lamest concussion ever, because I was doing an A-twist in the foam pit, and I had jumped in a class that Justin was teaching, the adult acrobatic class, which was my class to teach. I don't know, was it teen class? No, it was the adult class. Or was it teen class? Can't remember. It doesn't matter.
It's adult, yeah.
Yeah, and so we were doing stuff in the foam pit, and I was just hucking the hardest A-twists I could because I was going to the foam pit and I wasn't worried about my landings. And there was a raft in there that was one of the little floaty the foam devices. So odd objects in foam pit, watch out. And I just started hucking the hardest A-twist with no regard for my safety as possible because I'm going to a foam pit. And then when I laid out backwards and down, I whipped my head against a thicker mat that was in there, which was super lame because it was still a mat.
But still foam. It's
Yeah.
literal 2 inches of foam.
It was literally 2
But I
inches
think
foam.
it was that the mat was backed against the wall of the
Yes.
foam pit, and you hit the side, and so it's meant to compress this way.
Yeah.
And when you hit your head on the side, it was already against the wall, right?
Yep.
So when you hit it, it was essentially a firm surface.
Yep.
Which is like
an edge.
A very, like you have like maybe a 5-degree window at which you can hit the mat in that exact position that it would do anything to you, and it would literally have to be only your head to feel anything.
It was a perfect fail. You're right.
Yeah.
And I consider it a defining moment in life, and I bring it up even though it was not that big of an injury, is because throughout my life I've always used movement as not escapism, but a way to deal with any sort of stress. So if life's stressful, I'm training. I would be addicted to movement multiple times, or just when everything's like rough, you just go, you train, you feel better. And I had some, I don't know if they're one of the calcium crystals or just stress in life in general, and just the fatigue of recovery from, even just a little mild concussion left me with dizziness, vestibular stuff for, 6 months or something like that. And that just turned into anxiety, fear around always oh, what if I hit my head? A lot of people who have these types of injuries have that sort of unreasonable fear about stuff afterwards. I found out later on that that's very common. But part of it was rebuilding my vestibular system, because I always kind of felt like I was falling a direction or something like that, or I'd get dizziness. And so getting back to being able to do balance and things like that, with confidence is something that took time, repetition, and humility, because I usually would escape to movement to feel better. But now when I went to my escape, I felt worse. So I was more drawn to just playing time on the computers or doing work instead of actually working on that. But balance was always my best indicator of health, if that makes sense. So that's why I think it's important to me, is because to me balance is a really good indicator of physical health and your level of stress. You know this because if you come into class and you're warming up with balancing on rails and you're super stressed out because you're thinking about, you're not mindful in that moment, you're not in that moment, your head is just frayed, the monkey mind is all over the place, and you come in and you try and balance and you won't be able to, so oftentimes. And then you have to stop, okay, am I thinking about work? Am I thinking about life? Am I thinking about school? And then you can kind of calm. It's a good way to check yourself. So that's one of the reasons I like it. I think it's so important, is that you have to be focused. You can't.
Yeah. So that, kind of a long story on our part, but essentially to say, it is very possible that you have some sort of, vestibular inner ear, issue that you can train yourself out of, but don't be too hard on yourself if that is what you're coming back from, is a head injury and your balance sucks. Don't be oh my gosh, it's hopeless. You can work your way out of it, but do keep in mind that that's a physical thing that you have to overcome, whereas most of balance is simply a neurological thing that you just need to train and get repetition in. So if you're struggling there because of a head injury, don't sink into some dark depression because you think you'll never be able to balance again.
It is hard to not do that. As a matter of fact, I think that was maybe my adult life the only time I'd experienced any kind of depression. But that it was funny because I had a PT who was a neurologist, or had a PT and a neurologist, and they were telling me that it was most likely that I had always had. So this is on the physical side, that I'd most likely always had problems with my vestibular system genetically, but that through movement I had built up compensatory systems, strong compensatory systems, and that the head injury weakened those systems and just exposed an underlying issue.
Interesting.
That's what their hypothesis was. I don't know if that's true or not, but I could understand that. And also to your point, when you have people come in, because I've had, especially adults come in, or kids who are younger, parents tell us, I have a kid who has a vestibular issue. They come in, they train, and they've gotten better. So these are people who understand that there is a physical deficit, but that compensatory systems can be built around it. It's like when a tree grows around a house to still make it. It's yes, you're right. You'll never grow through that concrete, but you can grow around it. It's just harder, and that doesn't mean you shouldn't still try to grow, right?
Yep.
So don't you let it hold you back. But let's talk about the tips. I just feel like a lot of people walk in, they try a rail balance or something, they're horrible at it, and then they're like, I give up, I'm bad at balance.
Yeah, my first tip is it's all about volume. So if you're brand new to balance, it is all about doing more balance. At the gym, we obviously have ground rails that are, 2-3 inches off the ground, so that when you do fail, you don't fall and you're not hurting yourself. Obviously start there, but balance on everything. Curbs, rocks, the cracks in the floor of the concrete when you're walking, whatever you can, and if you can, get a ground rail, get some sort of platform, and balance, because it is just about volume. It's all about training, there's no loading and deloading cycles that you need to do for balance. You need to get in there and you need to fail, and that feels very frustrating. But if you just take pleasure in knowing that you suck at something, and that every time you fail, your brain is getting a little more data. It's all about data, right? Mm-hmm. And so the more balancing that you do, the more data that you get, the better your brain can compensate when you get on that rail as to what it knows, because it's like, we know what it feels like to fall this way.
And you're not making the decision you're not making a subjective decision of success around balance. Lots of times when we jump, if it's a poor quality jump, but you're still able to jump, you give yourself credit, but neurologically, not as much is going on, right? And same thing with balance, but you fall off. So there's no lying to yourself about whether you were good about balance or not. You're like, I'm a great balancer, but you fall right off. Nope. No change in that story. The wind, maybe. I don't know. But the other thing with the neurological aspect of volume in balance is that it's also something you don't have a lot of choice over, other than the choice to train it. A lot of what's happening is subconscious. So a lot of subconscious learning. And if you're not used to letting go and letting your body adapt and not judging it as you go through that process of failure, that in itself is a skill. Is just to be able to trust in the process.
Yep.
Yeah, also the failing and balance is kind of where you learn the most. If you're standing there on the rail and you're perfectly straight and you never fall off, you're not learning any more balance. You already have the balance you have. So the best experience is when you're falling off and you're fighting it.
And you're making adjustments.
Maybe you're going to fall off, but trying to save the balance is what makes you way better at balance. So if your balance is just standing there and you've got that for, I don't know, like 20 seconds, it's time to start falling off the rail.
Yeah, what do you think the main... to introduce variables and change, how much time should you just be able to do a static rail balance, maybe on the ground, before you think you should move on to introducing that change? Because at some point, it's like, new people I see, like they can't even spend 10 seconds.
Yeah.
They're just like, they continue. And that type of falling around for 5 minutes is not going to give you the same value as actually trying to be able to hold 10. How long do you think it is?
I think it's 30 seconds on each foot. Probably good enough to start doing other things then.
You're talking about, so if you were looking at a rail, balancing on one foot while looking parallel.
Yeah, we're looking
along the length of it rather than perpendicular.
Yeah. Oh, really?
That's when you're saying one leg. Because one leg perpendicular to the rail is that's kind of high level actually for balance.
Yeah, if you're like this.
Yeah. Perpendicular.
Yeah.
You're standing on it.
That's very hard. Yeah.
And one leg. So, okay, just wanted to make that.
So, 30 seconds with your foot along the bar. You're looking down the length of the bar, and you've got 30 seconds on each foot, and you can switch back and forth. That's pretty much. Then you can start walking and picking up the pace and going to another rail.
Mm-hmm. And that's definitely easier than being perpendicular to the rail, where both the balls of your feet are both on the rail, and you're not facing the direction that the rail is running.
Yep.
You would be like in a precision position, or like
exactly.
Like where you would do that one's harder, but that's actually where I start my adults we go for 30 seconds to a minimum to a minute. So do you agree with that?
Yeah, for time things, I actually don't, with my clients, I don't introduce a strict actual 30 seconds or something like that until I know that they have a decent understanding of balance. What I actually do is I ask them to hop on the rail. And if they're brand new to it, I say, I want you to get to a 10 count in your head before you fall off. I don't care what the pace is. So you can hop on the rail and be like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then fall off. Or if you feel like you're doing really good, you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right? Which are not seconds. Those are not 10 seconds. So you have a 10 count. And the reason I like that is because they're in control of whether or not they get to complete that goal. And there's a little bit of a reward system there because they're trying to get to that number before they fall off. And when they do, regardless of whether I'm not handing out lollipops or anything like that, but I set a goal, I met the goal, right? There's some reward incentive cycle there, which I'd like to see. And it's also easier for them because holding onto a stopwatch or watching a clock or something on the wall or counting in your head is just another thing, right? When you're trying to count 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000. So just having them just like, you can count to 10, just count to 10. Get to 10 before you fall. Count as fast or as slow as you need. And then I would up that to like 30. And once they get into like 30, where they can count to 30 before they fall, then I start to introduce time. But yeah, for any sort of like major variable, 30 seconds on a rail is really good.
Yeah, that's pretty good too, because when you're gonna fall at the end of your whatever your timeline is in your head.
Yep.
So we're counting to 10, and you're doing it 1, 2. You're gonna start falling at 7 and 8, and then you're squeezing these super kung fu moves to try and stay on the bar between those last 2 seconds. And I think those are the really golden learning opportunities.
Time,
Yeah, I also think for some reason the mind just doesn't work that way, where it's like not setting a timer for a minute. It has a difficult time perceiving time in that manner. It's more objective based, right? So
it's like the longest minute you'll ever do is in a freestanding handstand. You'd be like, it's gotta have been a minute. What are we at? 26 seconds. No!
I know! Yeah, that's so true. Okay, so then there's some physical things too, I think, that can be done with balance. Like I've found a very strong correlation between like just calf and ankle flexion and balance. Like if you take somebody who's got really weak ankles and is always sitting in that like hyperflexion, right? Like it meaning that the toe is starting to pour more and more towards the shin. Then to make adjustments in the ankle, it's actually very difficult. And I prefer to teach and train balance where I have my heel above the ball of the foot. And oftentimes I see people just collapsing the ankle and like sort of desperately trying to make
sitting on like the bone on bone of the ankle.
Yeah, at the end range of flexion, right?
Yeah.
Yep. And the bottom part of flexion, and then they're just trying to like make adjustments with their arms and knees. And I have some tricks that I like to teach for that, but I think that probably the easiest strength hack, if I'm going to use a strength hack for balance, would be to develop really strong calves and ankles, and even feet to some degree, because you're on the ball of the foot, and there is flexion that's happening in the sole of the foot in there too. Maybe because what you may find is that if you can't make 30 seconds in balance, like let's say you are timing yourself, which I don't like too much too, because you're looking at a clock. The focus isn't on yourself; it isn't on your balance. You're looking at something over here. It's almost like, you're a hunter focusing on the prey, but you're trying to build the ability to like hunt as a weapon or something. Anyway, that's a bad analogy, but no hold it against me. So what I am saying though is that I've seen people who have been like, I can't make it to 15 seconds, I can't make it to 30 seconds in balance, and then I'm like, okay, let's try I'm going to put you in that position of flexion, calf flexion, and you're going to stand just on the ground. And then they can't make it because they start to cramp up in the calf, or they start to cramp up in the sole of the foot. I'm like, okay, well then, you can try all you want.
Yes.
Your foot isn't even strong enough to balance for that long, so do calf raises, do some standing flexion, right? Some isometric training for the balls of your feet first.
Yeah.
Because that can happen.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too, and kind of goes back to our earlier point of like, it's all about volume for balance, right? Is that like a lot of those times it is a soft tissue thing as well, and so it's not like you can just train it for 2 weeks and suddenly you're good. You have to get that volume in there over a long period of time so that you get that adaptation in, and then that ankle gets stronger as a result of balancing, right? You're not only is your vestibular system getting trained, but you have some physical adaptation happening down in the ankle. So
yeah, and so it's actually back to your first point, which was, it is volume, physical volume too.
Yes.
That's still volume is the answer to that one.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then the other thing I'll say, a little tip, we were talking about split squat. Was it last week or the week before?
Oh, wait, hold on. I got on balance?
On balance,
you're trying to escape that one?
Well, Colin, the producer showed me the clock, so I'm just trying to do that.
No, my last thing is that so we can have a small discussion on this, but I don't think you should ever tell people to look at something that's still while they're balancing.
Why is that?
For parkour, I don't ever see the use of staring at something that you're not moving on, whether it's 10 feet in front of you or if it's off to the side. But the number one mistake that people are going to make when they're balancing, if they're walking along the bar or they're jumping between bars, is that they miss their feet. And if you're not looking at your feet, then you're going to have a higher chance of missing the object you're trying to step on, especially when it's only an inch wide. So if you're balancing, you're walking along the bar, or you're working on jumping between the bars, I feel like you have to look at your feet. I think the bar is still enough. Just look at the bar. If you really need to find something that's like not moving and you believe in that philosophy, which I don't really know if that's true or not, but when I move and when I see kids make the most mistakes, it's because they're not looking at their feet. They're looking at the box ahead of them, and then their feet are completely off. They're misaligned. They're like, and you only need half an inch to be misaligned for your foot to slip off the bar. So, and this is something I learned when I was doing slacklining, because I heard this tip a lot when I was slacklining. But when you're slacklining, your foot is like this when you're first learning, and
right,
you
shakes underneath you, right?
So, but when you start to look at it, it wavers like this, and so if you're trying to put your foot down over here, and it's wobbling like this, you have to look down to see that you're gonna miss it, and that's where I developed that technique. Where I'm looking at my foot and I'm knowing whether the bar is moving or the slack line is moving. Then I know to put my foot down on the obstacle. So I don't think it works. Maybe it makes sense for like a toddler learning balance on like a 2x4, but if it's parkour, you gotta look at what you're jumping on, because sometimes it's not there.
Well, a lot of the... Go ahead, Jesse.
I was going to say, at some point you'll get to a high enough level where you can, you know the rail runs straight, and you've walked and ran on enough rails that you're like, okay, I know what it feels like. But when you're training it for the first time, it's super important, because we see a lot of the times where kids walk on a rail and they're going heel to toe, and they look up because they're getting close to the end of that section, and then this foot slides. And they do this, like, they roll essentially from the outside of the ankle all the way up their thigh along the bar, and then they get, like, flipped, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't take much. If you're standing on a rail and you miss one step and you lean onto that foot, that's all of your weight. So if you're a kid, you're all 60 pounds going right on your thigh on a metal bar. And if you're an adult, it's just really unfortunate.
Right.
You're probably, anywhere from 110 to 190 pounds on average. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of weight to go right on the thigh. Like, if you ever had a Charlie horse from a friend punching you, imagine a rail slapping into your leg.
Yeah, and I think that the worst is that you're just going to get dumped upside down.
Yeah, and then, an insult to injury after the bar punches you in the thigh, it's going to flip you on your head.
Or rib check you, or hip check you, suitcase over the bar. So this is why I don't
That's a good point. Like, look where your foot's going when you're practicing, and when you get better, you can start to look elsewhere.
This is why I don't let, until much later in their practice, adults off the ground anymore.
Off the ground, yeah.
Because I had a couple suitcase early on, and these were actually people who were pretty experienced. I had one adult athlete suitcase on like some 4-foot rails, and the outcome was not great. So, I'm just like, there's just so much risk for the reward. Like, you can get the same stimulus. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna be climbing something else. It's a little thicker. You have a good time. It's not worth it just yet. You take that journey on your own. We'll get you there, but I'm not gonna introduce that to you just as an experiment to see what happens, right? So. I think that it's funny that you bring up the visual stuff directly, because that's actually part of the vestibular system. So the vestibular system is made up of the inner ear. You have your sense of sight that's also incorporated into the vestibular system, and your sense of touch. So you're sort of trying to figure out where. But the primary components of the vestibular system is going to be the inner ear and actually your eyes, right? They actually are very, very heavily involved in it. So where you look matters, because your body is getting feedback about balance based on where you are. So we know this.
That's also why balancing up high is very difficult too, because your eyes are trying to adjust to the ground below you. So this is why looking at your feet can be difficult, because you're looking 10 feet below you if you're on a 10-foot bar, or you're looking 2 feet below you if you're on a 2-foot bar. But your feet are right there, right? So that change in depth perception can throw you off.
Right, and you're still taking in peripheral data, meaning that even if the focus is on the foot, you're still gathering data from the outside field of vision, and that's going to have an effect on not only your vestibular system, but also your confidence, right?
Yeah.
And that's why sometimes if you are looking forward and you're at height, your risk is you don't know where you're stepping, but the benefit might be you're not afraid of...
This is my advice right there. I'm going to jump in. If you have to look at something ahead of you and you're working on balance at height, you're on the wrong progression.
I like it.
Yep.
You cannot be up on an 8-foot bar and looking dead ahead at the wall that's now I don't know, 16 feet up in the air, that's, absolutely no. If you're on the bar, you need to be comfortable with looking at your feet, because that's the worst bail when you slip on an 8-foot bar. So, that skill where you're looking at your feet and you're balancing at the same time, that one needs to be done on the ground first.
So that's another reason to look at the feet, because now you're also checking your comfort with height, overall comfort with height. Your overall fear of height. So I like that too. Do either of you guys train balance with your eyes closed? Because that's completely taking a factor of the vestibular system away from you.
Very difficult. I don't train it on purpose, but it's fun to try.
Yeah. I do it on ground rails when I'm bored. I'm being honest. Yeah, I just don't anticipate. I mean, I'm sure there's some benefits there, and maybe that's another topic as we're kind of dragging on now on our skill tip. But I don't ever train it because I don't anticipate that I'll ever do balance at height while blinded. And if I'm blinded, I'm probably going to stay on the ground.
Like, I think low light might be...
There's no risk.
Low light is especially for flips. Like, that's another tough one. Like, low light and flips, they're almost the same thing as doing it, like, at nighttime. So be careful with that.
Or, like, when you're at a performance and there's, like, strobing. Yeah. Like, nobody thinks about that. When they're like, yo, you want to, like, come and do some flips? And you're like, yeah, I'll do some flips. And then you get there, and it's like a rave, and you're like, oh my god, I've only done a cork in a very well lit spring floor, or even like in a daylight in a parking lot, right? But now you're in a dark room with like flashing lights all over you. The floor looks the same as the sky. It's all about can you.
We had a performance like that just a couple years ago where the Beat Boy crew, the Focal Flavor crew, was like, "Oh, come with us to this show," and they're like, "Oh, we just need you guys to flip off this stage." And I was like, well, the lights are in my eyes, and the stage is some depth. I don't know where the ground is, and I'm on the edge of it, and then there's speakers and wires in front of it. So
maybe that's another topic, parkour parties.
Parkour.
Parkour.
Yeah.
Topic.
We just got non-paid parkour for sure.
I'm not talking college parties, because I think everyone knows the answer to that one. I'm talking like you're with your friends at a backyard barbecue, because you always get called up there.
To do something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even if it's like, jump over that chair. So
the main topic today that we were trying to answer questions for, and this actually came out of a group of listeners who were asking me last night about the feeling of pressure to achieve and to accomplish things in a small window of time. Now, what I mean by that is, this is that feeling of, I only have a little bit of time to achieve and be successful, or maybe get a flip or get a trick or show progress before I feel like the external pressures or whatever, I don't have enough time in life to get done what I want to get done, what I want to achieve. Okay. So that was actually coming from adults, some in their 30s and 40s, but I hear this from, teens too. People are like, look, I got to get this flip before I'm out of high school, or I need it today. They're usually more like, adults are a little more reasonable. They're like, I think I have like a year or two to get what I want to get. But kids are like, it has to happen tonight.
Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah.
But it's the same mindset. So
your window to completion is definitely very short when you're younger.
So what do you guys think?
The urgency's higher.
The urgency's higher. Well, and your little like fruit fly perception of time is it's happening. What do you guys think? Do you have enough time to get it done? Is there a window? Does it close? Is it all over?
Yeah.
Are you done, Rocky?
Absolutely, you have a window. Duh, right?
Well, what's that window? I mean, there's a window of existence.
Yes. Yeah, but I think your window changes.
Done within that window. That is.
Yes, I don't want to be like, oh no, you guys can take however long you want. No, you do have to have a plan, and your window. I feel like your window is affected by your training. If you're rushing and you're anxious about it, your window is going to shrink because you're not spending the time to build strength and mobility, and you're worried about getting it right now. But if you take your time and you learn progressions and you pick up a lot of other skills along the way, I feel like your window kind of moves out further, right? So, but then again, you also have 80-year-olds who ski and do backflips on skis. So it's like, you definitely don't need to be stressing about getting it done in a certain time frame. And if parkour, if a backflip or if a cork or what is these backflips, flips for these adults, right?
Yeah, we're not on flips too.
Yeah, if they're worried about flips, you definitely have to take your time on that. And if you rush it, your window's gonna shrink real quick because it just takes one injury and then you're outside your window.
Right.
So that was gonna be my point, is that at some point, yes, you will like not be able to do these things, but I think that window oscillates a bit based on what your history of athleticism is. I mean, if you've been athletic and you've taken care of yourself your entire life and now you're in your 40s, I think you've got a very big window to do very cool stuff. Now, if you've been overweight, unhealthy, chair-bound for the entirety of your life and now you're in your 40s, and good on you for being like, I want to make changes, you have to be realistic and notice that 30 years of your life has been sedentary, maybe 40. I'm giving everybody 0 through 10.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, your window is definitely smaller and you need to move at a slower pace. That doesn't mean it's impossible, because you may have just like rock star genes that were just like hiding underneath.
Yeah, you could have.
Yeah, that's possible. That is totally possible. Unlikely. I won't give anybody false hope.
Right.
But unlikely, but everyone else will have this ability except you. That's how it's gonna feel.
It's okay, Justin. Justin is condemning his genetics.
I think regardless of your history, you do need to be aware of, the older you are, the slower you want to take it, not just because you're older, but because
the risk of injury is higher.
And the danger, the level of catastrophe from injury is higher, right?
Yes.
Like a 12-year-old can roll his ankle and later that evening be running around with his friends in the parking lot. Everybody here and listening has stubbed their toe over the age of like 25 and been like, wow, that still hurts tomorrow. Why? Right? So you can only imagine, like, if you do a backflip and you bail out of it and you bash your knee or you hit your head, that's now you've just lost all of that time that you could have been practicing, as well as all of that growth that you would have gained. So there's an opportunity cost there, and you need to be aware that, like, it takes longer to recover, so you need to move slower because injuries are more disastrous for you than you would be at a younger age.
Oh, go ahead. You're going to say something.
No, I also wanted to know, what do they envision when they say that they have a window to get a skill? What does the skill look like? Are they trying to do it off of obstacles? Because that is a very tough one. If you're trying to flip off of something, or you're trying to have a flip that you can pull out at any given time, that is a pretty tough skill to achieve. And
what's your level of mastery?
Yeah, but if you're like, if I just want to be able to do a backflip, and you're not really picky about where you do it, then your window's huge, right? If you're like, I want to do a backflip on concrete at any wedding I go to, at any time.
At any wedding, right?
At any wedding, yeah.
Right.
With dress shoes?
That's tough. Like, the backflips where the ground is where those location and your environment is strict. No.
Yeah,
I found one.
You're fidgety.
I did find one, yeah.
Found something to play with in the podcast.
So
take away his toy.
You need to be really flexible with where you do your skill in particular, and then you're gonna have a much easier time with your window too. If it's like, I just want to do backflip on a trampoline, super easy, and you got plenty of time to learn that.
That's true.
So there's a couple points I want to make with that, because I think those are really good observations. I'm actually impressed at you guys' ability, not being that old, to understand what it's like to grow older, and I think that really comes from just having done movement for a long time. Like, let's not forget that if you've been sedentary into your 30s, even though you're in your 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s or whatever, you've been sedentary that long, you are not as experienced as someone who's been training, into their 20s from their teens when it comes to what it's like to train for a long time and not get what you want. So I'm not even talking. So we can adjust the scale from like backflip to, push up to whatever. But that feeling, the psychological effect of plateauing or getting harder to learn is something that even younger movers will have been through a lot. And the other thing is I think that the window of time is actually very, very big, and you can always get started. So if your issue is you're starting in your 30s and your 40s or your 20s, to be honest, and actually in your teens, if you're like the way that kids are showing up these days as far as like their level of activity and experience coming in, you got a kid who's like literally been on an iPad until he was 12, and he walks in, and he's not in any better shape. I mean, he has more time, but yeah, if you're in that position, you need to be able to focus on your ability to get healthy first, right?
Yeah.
So you're saying you want a backflip. Okay. Well, what other markers of health have you met to indicate, like, are you reaching, right? Like, I'm worried about my window. I need a backflip now because I don't have enough time, but your other health is not in check. Like, your ankle doesn't work, right? You have an injury you haven't been able to repair or learn to work with, but you want to go for the backflip. It's like you have to be humble enough to take the time to get your health in a place. Because I'll tell you right now, out of shape, even though I've done probably thousands of backflips at this point, out of shape backflip, like I haven't been training a backflip, and I've been sedentary, and then in shape backflip, just to recall that and call it, is way different.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I know how to do them, but like the level of how easy it is when you're just in shape to do something athletic like that.
Yeah.
Is way different. It's like we were talking about earlier with the balance. It's like, okay, you can't balance for 30 seconds in calf flexion on the ground, but you're beating yourself up because you can't balance for 15 seconds on a rail at any kind of height.
Yeah.
The baseline physical health is not there. So that's what you got to get in check first.
It's true. And you can use the flashy movement or whatever as your incentive to get there, because let's be honest, like,
yeah,
I have weak ankles, and working on ankles is gonna be one of the more boring things you're ever gonna do.
Super boring. Calf raises, 30 reps. Why? You stare at the wall the whole time.
Like, and you just sit there and you just look at it and you're like, okay, awesome, cool. But you can be like, no, I recognize that this is gonna help me in the long run get this cool, to get this backflip, and that's my end goal. I think that's pretty important. As for like what your window is specifically, I think there's just so many factors in there, but a really big one is also your attitude around approaching that movement.
Mm-hmm.
Justin and I's grandpa is now 80, and I would wager that man still mows his like 6 acres in Tennessee by hand.
Yeah.
He probably still pulls out an old lawnmower, and mostly it's because he's cheap. And he's like, nah, I don't need that. I got this perfectly good like 1960s lawnmower that I've been repairing since then. And would mow that, But he's still like, his attitude, even though his overall health, I would wager, is not that great, his attitude around like, I want to go out and still do this thing is so high that he still goes out and does these things. Now, at some point, that flips and becomes a negative thing, where you think you're better than you are physically, and that's dangerous. But if
there's delusion.
Yes, that's when it turns from confidence into
delusion,
ego.
Yeah.
And so I think it's super important that if you're like, oh, I'm too old, that you shut down that talk and you're like, nope, I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna work on it, right? But that you're still being realistic.
And you're gonna find the right process.
Yes.
And I just had somebody, one of our mutual students and longtime like family members from the gym. I posted me doing some like isometric work or whatever, and it was work on splits. And then they commented. It was Heather actually. She commented and she says, "Hey, so this is great. I'm working on my splits too." And she said something like, "Oh, I always remember." Because in the picture, I'm not doing the splits. I'm working on the isometric split. So I'm splitting, but I'm not doing all the way to the ground, like showing off. I'm showing the isometric balance that happens there. And she's like, oh, I'm working on the splits myself. And then I always remember the advice that you gave me to earn your progression, to not be too thirsty, to earn each progression. And I was like, oh, I said that.
Did you say that, not to be too thirsty?
No, I think that I'm going to add that to it. I didn't even remember I said earn your progression, but I was like, well, I need to take that advice. That's actually really good. Like, and take my own advice sometimes. But what that means is, like, don't wait until you've lost the ability even to work at this stuff to enjoy doing it. Because if you have the superpower, and I will call this a superpower, to be able to enjoy that journey of learning it, right? And then getting that little victory, and then being able to call that back up 6 months later and still, like, you know, taste the rainbow or whatever, right? That's the Skittles. It's the Skittles thing, to taste that sweet success, right? Or to taste the bitter of having trained that. We're back into food analogies, sorry. So that is a superpower, right? To be able to just sit there and be like, man, I remember when I met that goal, that felt really good. But we spend so much time as people being like, that wasn't good enough. And you can only taste it. It's almost like your palate, like a movement palate is what I was talking about the other day. Like your sophistication of your movement palate is to be able to savor and be like, oh yeah, I remember that took a little bit of like outstanding effort, and there was some community there, and then a little bit of workaround. Oh, I didn't think I could do it, and then I did it. That was great. That was really cool. And if I'm just imagining a warm-up, that's an awesome skill set. Because most people will be like, work, suffer. They get that one trick, that one night, that one skill, that one plateau. They climb up the wall, they do the flip, and then for a second they're like, yes, I did it. And then they just take a step back and they judge it and like, that wasn't good enough because it had X, Y, and Z wrong with it.
Yeah, or the next day they don't have it and they beat themselves up when they lost a trick right after they got it too.
I'd say that's more common with like children. That I see that where they get something one day like wall run, and they come back the next day for practice and they're not getting it, and then they like start getting frustrated and they're like teary eyed.
It's not
uncommon. It's not uncommon in adults, I guess.
Right. I want to point out that I had no conversation with Jesse about that prior to coming on this podcast, because that happens pretty frequently with adults. Like, it does.
Where they beat themselves up because they lose it?
Oh, they're almost worse as far as like how hard they are on themselves. But so I've seen some kids be pretty hard, because kids will get really hard, then they're kind of like, I don't know. I'm just more and more convinced that like genetics and like your personality just like it just carries into adulthood, and I see the same behaviors in adults that I see in the kids, and I excuse it as like kid behavior, and then I see the same thing. Not that the behavior is childish as an adult. I'm just saying like maybe that behavior is just how you're working through things and how you work through things and achieve. And so I think some of it is this, and it's our responsibility as coaches when someone has that, to take a step back and look at what is it you're trying to get done. Like when you say I have a short amount of time to do cool stuff, what is it? Like what are you trying to do that you're trying to get done in that time?
Yeah.
And then why do you place such a high value on that? Because if someone's like, I want to always have the backflip at a wedding, maybe they're thinking they just want something cool to do at a wedding.
Yeah.
And
it doesn't need to be a backflip.
It doesn't need to be a backflip. I can show you 20 other things that are going to be cool, and you're going to get the attention. You're going to feel like you expressed yourself in that moment.
Easier to do when drunk.
And safer, right? Like you won't want to throw up afterwards. You won't have to buy the right shoes just for that move to go to a wedding. Because that's what I think about when I look at the shoes at weddings, is I'm like, am I going to be able to do some tricks in these shoes when I get to the dance section?
Pro tip at like flips at wedding, wipe your shoes before you do the flip.
Pro tip in general, wipe your shoes.
Wipe your shoes.
Yeah. I don't think
like
people...
this.
Yeah,
but
like,
you take your whole flat of your hand.
Not post-COVID.
Flat of your foot, and you gotta do the whole thing. I see a lot of people that are just like
on the ball
and
of
then
it.
wipe. Yeah, it's like it's gotta be the whole thing.
No, with dress shoes you gotta do the whole shoe.
Yeah, I don't care. I'll mess up the calf, and I just rub it down the inside of the leg on the pant.
That makes me cringe.
I know, but it's like for me, it's like I know where shoes go. I don't want to put my hand there and then be like I also see athletes like basketball players and parkour people for sure like lick their hand and then do the rub on the foot. I'm like, come on, folks.
You don't need to lick.
You just had E. coli and everything you could imagine, like doggy doo-doo. You're just like putting it all in your mouth, and then you're gonna do the jump. That's gonna make you jump worse.
We should sell shoe wipes.
Shoe wipes?
Yeah.
I'm down. I was also, like I said, I think the calf that you can like wipe on and then just wipe off, it's a different material.
You gotta have respect for your clothes, bro.
I'm respect for my hand, my skin. Okay, alright, so...
Wash those!
Back to Windows.
Back to the windows of time. So how is it that... Thank you for that. That helped a lot. So how is it that we define what it is that we're really trying to get after?
Yeah.
Right?
That's a good one.
Yeah.
And so the metaphor I was thinking of the other day, or yesterday rather, that came to me, was that when we're trying to pursue things, it's like climbing a mountain. And if you get to the top and the peak is so narrow that you can't even balance up there, you can't stay up there very long, then it's not going to be very enjoyable, because the real skill is building a flat mountaintop. And here's what I mean by that, is building enough things that you find value and that you derive value from, that you can enjoy, that you can experience, that when you're at the level of achievement, people are maintaining the peak. They're pursuing the peak and not maintaining the plateau. Building the plateau, right? Mm-hmm. Because if your mountaintop's very flat and at the top, you're able to sit up there, you can do lunge, there's room for a backflip.
Yeah.
You have a broad range of things you can do and enjoy. Someone else can come up there with you, right? You can explore the area, and there's a lot of like the palette is sophisticated. There's a lot of things you can do and achieve up there. Then that's way better than just saying, I've been chasing a backflip for 2 years. 3 years, 10 years, whatever. Mm-hmm. Or I've been chasing a wall run, or whatever that very sort of specific objective thing is. And when I achieve that, then I'll be happy.
Yeah.
That's a problem, because what happens when you get it and you're not happy?
Yeah.
And you can't keep it forever. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty good. I like that plateau analogy.
The flat mountaintop. I think it's a good metaphor.
It is a great metaphor.
How are some, and I know it works. That's why I've not prepped you guys for this question, but I'm going to ask you, how is your mountaintop flat?
How is it flat?
Yeah. How are you already, which I'm making assumptions, how are you already finding value, fulfillment, and happiness in doing movement, and it's not just all hinged and levered on one movement or one trick or one modality, right? So you only have a small window of time to do cool stuff. Okay, well, how is it that you guys
have extended that window?
Right.
Well, I think my my social media following would tell you that I haven't posted in a very long time. So for me, I've been happy with my movement. And the other day when we were on Sunday when we were at the gym and we were just doing some flips, those are probably the first flips I had thrown in maybe 6 to 10 months, somewhere around there, right?
Yeah, we're 45 minutes into doing some top rock, and then you call a spontaneous backflip.
Oh yeah,
check.
Yeah, backflip check. Yeah, you're right. Pull that out.
Same here.
So I think for me, the way that I've extended that window is one that I've just found other interests that are movement related that I find the complexity to be the same or higher than skills that I already have, right? And I'm nurturing those, but I'm not ignoring the skills that I worked hard to get. And I try and pull them out every now and then and be like, oh, hey, I need to check in on that. Is that still a skill that I have, right? Like corks, do I still have those? I worked really hard to get that skill because there was no one at the time that I, learned it that even knew how to teach it, right? So it was a very self-taught journey. So I kind of tab in on there and check and make sure that's still a skill I have. But it's not my priority.
When you say movement complexity, so let's say you have your movement palette, right?
Uh-huh.
What are the flavors? What are you able to taste? Why is it that it's just not just sweet and sour?
For me, it's a couple of different things. Does it scale with age? A cork, I probably won't be doing at 80, although I'm going to do my best to try and get there. Mm-hmm. But can I dance at 80? Absolutely. Will I be doing flares at 80? Again, I'm going to do my best to get there, but probably not. Yeah, Justin's like, whoa. Not air flares, just regular flares, okay? Maybe one. I don't have the rep them. But for me, what I look for in the move is, does it scale with age? Mm-hmm. Can it be applied to multiple different scenarios? Mm-hmm. And is it inherently risky for me? So what's one of those that scales with age, has complexity, but is risky for me? Roof gaps. You can find a roof gap that's like this, and you could definitely jump that at 80. Mm-hmm. It scales with age because you just find a smaller roof gap. It's complex because it's a high-risk skill, and there's a lot of stimulus going on. But the risk of failure is super high, and I don't enjoy that. I don't get off on that.
The danger is very high. Yeah.
So for me, when I'm looking at maintaining my plateau, I'm looking at those three things, right? Dance, very low risk of injury, right? Very complex, can get very complex, and scales great with age. But then I like to tab in on the past moves that
So what elements of parkour are like that too? And I like to also circle back on real quick to pin you down. We'll let Justin answer too, but think about like what. So I view those as almost more of the dish, not the actual like palate. Like you mean like that's not the flavor. Like why is it that even doing any of that matters to you like experientially? Like why are those even? What's even enjoyable about that? Like you did the roof gap. Okay, you started to kind of talk about it a little bit. There's a lot of stimulus and stuff going on there, but why does it even matter to do a roof gap? Like why?
Well, it doesn't to me.
Okay.
Right now. Yeah, I could not do another roof gap for the rest of my life, and I'd be just as happy.
And is that because you can call on that experience in the past though too to some degree?
Sure. Yeah, I mean I've definitely done a decent amount of them, and I just don't find that like there's enough
depth,
spice, and there's enough depth. There's not enough. Yeah,
there's enough literal depth.
I guess compared to the other things that I do, there's not enough complexity in that singular skill that attracts me to it.
So Justin, what in parkour? So that I hear what you were saying there, the longevity and the ability to go back and do those things and still experience them is a huge lever for you then. Like the ability to continue to do that movement seems to matter a lot.
Yes, and if it's been 10 years since I've done a roof gap and I see a really simple one and I've still been jumping, I may be like, you know what, I'm going to go do that because I haven't done it in 10 years and give it a shot. Sure,
Mm-hmm.
I might do that.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Justin?
Say your question again.
So basically, what is it that makes that which you value more sophisticated? Because Jesse was saying, well, I'm looking for these more complex movements instead of being like, how are you making your mountaintop flat?
Oh, okay. I'm definitely satisfied with what I've done in the past. So I don't feel like I need to prove to myself that I need to do more things. I want to do a lot of things, but I've done so much in 15 years of doing parkour that I feel like I do have a point in my life where I'm not too worried about proving any other points. But that's a skill that I could have had way earlier, because definitely my journey was almost for the first at least 5 years, maybe the first 10 years, was trying to prove points to the rest of the community that you could do cool stuff. And so I definitely could have learned from my current self and taught my past self, that there's just so much enjoyment in the things that I'm already doing, that trying to learn new things to prove to other people is usually going to put you in the higher risk category of skills. If you're trying to impress people, then that usually means that you got to do stuff that they haven't seen before. So if your peak is impressing people with things that they can't do, then I feel like your peak is going to get pretty small. So I say do things that you enjoy and that feel good while they're doing them. And for me, that is without risk. Right now, my plateau is big because there's a lot of things I can do without risk. And I'm not pushing flips or techniques that put me in high risk.
So you're building a broader repertoire but that enables you, right? So if the only thing you can focus on is one flip, if that's the only thing you know,
Mm-hmm.
what you really need to do is build your vocabulary, because the vocabulary is essentially the palette, right? Because then you have more options. But then you also need the ability to be mindful and have the attention enough to enjoy it. And to be honest, the appreciation for your ability to do really anything and fostering that and that sensitivity, I think, is super important in your training. Because when I think back peak experiences and what I enjoy doing and training, I lost a lot from COVID, which was working with my students or training with other people or training myself in an environment where I wasn't having to wear a mask. It's like that all of those things, you lose them, and then you're like, oh, if I could just do that right now, that's really, I was getting a lot of fulfillment out of that. And if you don't have the awareness, so sometimes there's the mindfulness exercise that I've seen done. I think we need the movement equivalent of this as part of the disciplines that we employ, is where you do the blindfolded meals, taste testing meals. Have you seen those done before? Where people will basically, they'll put a blindfold on and you're eating something like cake or dessert, or you're going through a meal, and then you're really paying attention to the taste. And then people who do this report back saying that that things tasted so much more, they tasted so much better, and there was so much more awareness around the flavor, and that the experience was a very peak experience. I had Nova accidentally ended up doing this on one of her like kids' iPads apps, and always talks about how this one time she had some like, I don't know, either crackers or cookies or something like that, and they were like the best cookies she'd ever had. But just because she was taking the moment to like really taste it and enjoy it and savor it, right? And that's a skill set. I think that's the ability to go in and have a training session. We've talked about this recently, and make a training session enjoyable.
Yeah,
is important, right? You were saying recently that's something you even look for in who you're training with, is people who can actually enjoy the session when you're training with a group, right?
Yeah, I think I remember what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I think there's that. There is the ability to also, as you're climbing towards your flat mountaintop, to stop. There's plenty of opportunities to stop along that way and just take a look back at what you've done and the progressions you've come through, and just have some respect for that and enjoy that to some degree. I'm not saying don't be ambitious. I'm not saying don't climb the mountain, but it almost looks like ungrateful when even as a coach, when you're watching students, they show progress and you can see where they were and where they've come from, but it's frustrating when they can't even see their own growth or development through that. You're like, what's the missing link there?
Yeah, it gotta be. I feel like it's ego. You're trying to prove something to someone, yourself or other people.
Yeah, that can be yourself.
Because if you're not taking the advice, when someone's saying, look at where you've been, look at what you can do, look at what you've accomplished, and that's not enough for you, like, man, it's gotta be ego. It's gotta be too much, too hard on yourself. But yeah.
So I when you do have an achievement, you're looking back at the things that you did accomplish. So just go through this exercise right now. Just like think about something that you worked towards. Maybe you got it, maybe you didn't get it. But think back to the different plateaus that you had where you were able to, where you should have and you could have taken a step back and really enjoyed it and been like, this is something that I achieved that mattered a lot to me, that surprised me when I did it. And then being able to go back and taste that moment in the same way. I think that is an awesome skill set that helps alleviate things like regret. Because a lot of what people are running from is regret. They're worried they're going to get too old or get too deep into something else, and they're going to lose sight about what they're passionate about, or their achievement, or what they thought it would feel like to do something.
Yeah.
And also understand there's a difference between watching something be done and how that makes you feel, and being the one to do it, too. Because we talk about this with the competition. If we're talking about you experiencing something for the enjoyment of it, you probably aren't going to be competing at a high level for the goal of how it feels to, how good it feels to do that, right? You're doing it for other reasons.
Yeah.
And maybe something like training with a group of friends or working on a progression in an environment that's comfortable is going to be better for you is going to just be more, you're getting more joy, derive more joy from that than actually hitting that movement. Although I will say, have you guys been around someone achieve something that they've been working on, like when they break through getting a move or a trick, right? We've been around that, like the wall runs for kids and the band challenges.
Oh, yeah.
Like seeing somebody land their first trick. Being there for that is...
It's really cool.
Yeah, and the energy is very high. Very awesome to be in that sort of moment and be able to celebrate that with somebody. I think something that's worth mentioning around like just skills or goals in general is, Ido Portal says, right? Like some skills or some things are windows and some skills are doors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for example, in the parkour realm, a back tuck is a door, but if you're not a parkour person, it may be a windows skill for you. And what I mean by that is that windows are great and they allow you to see a very long way and they allow you to see a whole world of new things as opposed to a wall, right? But the difference in that is a door allows you to enter that new realm and access those things that you see. So a very high level skill, I'll just take like a very high level tricking skill, may be a window for you. It's very cool. It's nice to have. You should have a few of those window skills. But will a double cork help you get stronger and run up the stairs and play with your kids? Probably not.
Or will just a double cork even be something that you could throw continuously and even get that much intention and fulfillment from? Like, if that was the only thing you did, and even if you went to venues in which that was impressive, if you just continuously threw that, people would be like, but eventually, like, just imagine, like, a battle where the person just throws double corks the whole time. You're like,
yeah.
Or even triples. And you're like, okay, we get it, dude. That was awesome. But you're not gonna...
Yeah, it's like it's the end of the road, right? And
yes.
And it doesn't, there's no more on that road because there's no doorway to walk through. So if your goal or your skill is a window skill and it's going to take you 5 years to get there because you're starting at the age of 40 or 50 or 60 and you're like, okay, realistically I have ankle issues, I have mobility issues that I need to, and then I can work on strength issues, and it's going to take you 5 years to get there, then maybe that skill is not one that you need to work on if it's a window at the end, right? Maybe instead you want to pick a door skill.
Work on those door skills.
Because then also the benefit of it's very hard to slide back through a door, right? Like if you've got a backflip and then, this is just a layman's example, but if you have a backflip and then you learned a double backflip and then somehow magically you're the first person in the world to get a triple backflip, how long is it going to take before you lose a regular back tuck?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to take you a very long time, right? But you've walked through several doors at that point to get to another level of skill, so that even when you do age and you do lose focus on these things, your fallback from your top of the mountain, you have so many plateaus below before you hit the base of the mountain that you can always go back to that next plateau.
And on the way back down or the way back up, if you fell off, you can stop along the way. Like, that's happened a lot for me for injuries and whatever. Sometimes I'll go back through older, martial arts skills or other skill sets that I built on, and I'm going to stop, and I just enjoy it again. I'm like, I'm going to go back through this. I did this as a beginner. I'm going to do it again, and this is really cool. I kind of forgot. I'm better at this now. I like it. Mm-hmm. You run into that, especially with the fundamentals. And like you're saying, if your peak's so narrow that it's this one skill, and that's the peak of your mountain, it's going to be very hard to maintain and sit atop on that.
Yep.
And if you fall off, it's a long fall down. For a one-handed hand balancer, that wasn't your only thing, but I mean, I'm saying that's the example who has a wrist injury.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, if you're all about hand balancing and then suddenly you lose your hands in a horrific car accident, God forbid that happens.
I mean, you could just have injury from chronic use.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't even need to be a catastrophe. That's where most of it happens, right? You see, I was doing hand balancing, then my wrist started bothering me too much, and then I stopped. Okay, what do you do now? Meh.
Yeah, and then it's like, there goes, 10 years of really hard focus and potentially a career for you. Just whoop.
And the only way to experience that joy, unless you have the superpower of being able to go back in your mind and
enjoy that.
Yeah. Enjoy that from the past, right? It's like the metaphor I gave yesterday when I brought that up was like freezing your wedding cake. Have you guys heard of that ritual?
Mm-hmm.
So like when people get married, what they'll do is they'll freeze their wedding cake and then in their anniversaries thaw pieces of it and eat it through the rest of their life, which I don't know at what point that becomes...
It's like only 1 year.
Yeah, you only get about a year.
Man, no, I've heard people go further. We can research as to how far you can go with frozen cake.
I know people will do that.
I was saying there's maybe particular types of cake that are better for that.
Yeah, maybe. Denser cakes.
You're just going to some freezer burnt cake. Hopefully your relationship doesn't taste like that 5 years, 10 years in. So there's that aspect of it. I would say also that, do you have enough time? I think anybody who's out there who's of the mindset that they're going to achieve something and get it done, and they're going to find enjoyment from that, and they're excited about the process, that alone is gift enough. There are so many people who are just not motivated enough to do anything or find any sort of joy or excitement about a process. Just respect that.
Yeah.
That alone is awesome. Yep. And then I also say that people, as we value movement and fitness and health more and what we can do recreationally with our bodies, the lifeline, or not the lifespan of that, or the health span of that, is getting pushed out. So we're seeing more and more people who are older, who weren't just focused on survival of the past, who've been able to focus on these disciplines, become better and better. It's not super uncommon to see 40-year-olds doing backflips. But when I was growing up, like a 40-year-old who did a backflip, what? Not a thing. But now it's like if someone comes and does it or gets it, or the people we've seen do it or have taught at that age, we're like, oh, that's good. They're really pushing the limits, but I'm not like, my jaw's not dropped. I'm not going to write anybody about it, and be like, oh, I can't believe I just saw this happen. But like the stuff I will is like, I've seen that the old Chinese guys, the calisthenics guys in China with like, who's like 80 years old with a one-arm chin. Like that I'm like still wow about. Okay. But
if so I want to throw this in there.
Yeah,
if backflip is the skill that you guys are worried about the window closing on, you have a really large window for backflip.
You do.
I mean, I'm not even counting like backflips off of a boat into a water. Like, I mean, the window for backflips, it's almost like our bodies were designed to do backflips. The posterior chain is so strong, and some of the times you could just fall off a ledge into a backflip. So if people are worried about that, there's definitely enough time for it.
Yeah.
Other flips too.
It is, not to diminish anybody who worked hard on a back tuck. It is a very simple, mechanical flip.
It's a reasonably high box jump backwards with confidence.
Yep.
I mean, so there is like a limit on like your athletic ability and whatnot. So you do need some athletic ability, but that can be compensated with height. Like once you have to understand like, into a foam pit or into a mat or something.
And it's so symmetrical that like everything's being used at the same time at the same amount of forces. So, I mean, I feel like backflip's pretty safe. The only part is the fear. If you're dealing with fear, that's the hard. So you don't want to be doing backflips with fear.
Afraid.
Fear will make those.
Or delusionally confident. That comes with age too, apparently. So the other thing I want to say, and just a couple things before we wrap up today, I want to say that one of the things that I think is older and interesting, and I don't know many people that have done this is. So some of the more interesting movements, those asymmetrical twisting movements, A twist, B twist, corks, I think those I would put as more sophisticated things, maybe potentially doors, depending on what you plan to do with them or where they would go, but maybe A twist and B twist being a little more that way. But I got my first corks at 34. So I think that's the number. When we talk about like just calling out things that you got later on in life, I was not landing corks until I was 34, and I haven't maintained them real well, but consistently, and they looked pretty good. So that is something that one of those things where it's like, I thought, okay, when I'm in my 30s, before I'm 35, I'm going to get a cork. And I got the cork, but I gave time for that journey. Like I already had B twists, so I wasn't coming from nothing. I was respecting that.
Yeah.
I was already spicy and kicky from the other stuff I was doing athletically. And then I had the right equipment, tools, and I was committed to a process of doing it, not hucking and hoping, right? Yeah. So I was very focused on the feeling and revisiting, and like what you're saying is you're not just going to throw tricks into the ground, or run against a wall into perpetuity. If you're failing something more than 3 times, you're going to take a step back and adjust your approach. Yeah. Recording yourself can have a tremendous effect on this. Although if you've never recorded yourself before, be ready to be really judgy about yourself, right? But getting comfortable recording yourself and fixing those things is going to be a difference that can help in the process tremendously. And then also just allowing for more and more people to achieve in this way. We won't know if this is something that people who are going to be able to sustainably do this stuff in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. We see some outliers, but we won't know for another 10 or 20 years because these disciplines and these habits have just not been around that long. Yeah. So we have to wait and see really how long people can be doing this. But I will tell you, I have athletes in their 60s who are still discovering parkour. And that's amazing to me. And so I know that you have plenty of time to be doing it. I'm not saying that these folks are doing some of the bigger moves, but they're doing stuff that's very obviously parkour, and for them, they're having a similar experience as to what it would be for anyone of any age to go through that and learn that. So before we close today, we talked about the windows and the doors. What are the doors of parkour? Like, what are skills that, like when someone says, I want to learn a backflip, to me, we're using those references because they're very easy for anyone listening to understand what those movements are. Mm-hmm. But if someone were to come to me and say, oh, I want to learn a B twist, I'd be like, ooh, that's harder. So I'm going to be like, the actual approach is going to be more challenging. But somehow I respect that pursuit more because to me, the B twist is more of an interesting movement. I see more complexity in it, like you were talking about the complexity overall. So when in parkour, what are some of the door movements? I'll kick it off by saying I feel like climb up.
Oh yeah,
climb up C. a huge tour.
For sure. Yeah, and then there's jumping precisions across boxes are a pretty big door, but project on the ground would be your door before that. Lachaise. So getting off the bar and onto anything upright from your hands to your feet. I think that's a pretty huge thing.
And or even the lachaise regrab, because I see a lot of people posting on Instagram. You know, as lots of OCR ninja folks who will do the swing on the lachaise. Well, they're not really. I think they're technically doing a lachaise, but it's not a regrab. So they're going from one bar to the other, and it's where they had the big swing, and they throw, and then they grab on, and then the body just like boom slumps, like swings forward, and versus being able to continue that into another movement, even if that's just like a 360 turnaround or something like that. It doesn't have to be a flyaway or anything like that. So climb ups, broad jumps, I think are definitely a thing.
Yeah, broad jumps are a huge one. And then I think probably your ability to stride, so single leg plyometric jumps, are arguably, after you get like your climb up and your like basic jumps down, that's probably the biggest door for you, because it allows you to do skills at speed, which is really the premise of parkour. Is like, cool, you can climb up that building. Now how fast can you climb up the building, right? But if you can just like stride and you're like tacking your way up there, like, and that's all single leg plyometric skill. So I'd say single leg plyos are a huge door in parkour.
Exactly. I'm super glad you brought that one up, because when I imagine like me being older, or if coming at a point where I'm more focused on the finesse and less on the gross movement of like a wall run or a big jump, what I'm gonna be working on, I kind of imagine myself as like a boxer of feet with like strides and tacks and footwork, right? Mm-hmm. Like I look at a scattered group of low obstacles and I'm able to be like, you know, okay, 2, 1, 2, 2, you know, 1 steps versus 2 steps, 2, 1, 2, 2, same leg, like ghost or miss leg step, and then being able to hit this fancy light footwork. Like I love when I have new people come in and they're like, oh, what do you do? I couldn't hear it. Like, that's cool, right? That's when, so when I'm older and I'm just like, people are like, well, show me the finesse. Like, you could jump, you know, back in the day, you could jump 9 feet, or you could do these big moves, or you could do these strides. Like, show me what you can do now. Show me some parkour. And we're outside and there's rocks or trees and I'm just like, and then like there's no sound and the footwork is subtly complicated, like a boxer's footwork, like a really good boxer's footwork, or like the mitt work. They're not hitting super hard, but it's like pop, 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 right? And you're just like, oh, wait, how did they do that? That's really cool. That's what I want to have with my footwork. So I think that's super cool, which is why I spend so much time with my adults on learning the different footwork patterns of jumping from 2-1, 2-2-1, basically playing what I'm calling parkour hopscotch.
Yeah.
And getting really good at that. But sometimes they look past that and they look at the wall run, or they look at the backflip, and they're like, oh, what am I going to do? Like, you don't understand. You were already doing the cool stuff. You just can't see it yet.
Yeah.
You were doing the coolest stuff. You can't see it yet. And the sad thing is not everybody's going to be impressed by it, because the deep, you know, it's back to the culinary references, like the really deep, sophisticated flavors, it takes somebody with a sophisticated palate to figure out. But they're very rich and enjoyable.
Or just like Justin said, if you're doing things because you want to appeal to other people, then, you know.
That's why you're going to suffer, is because there's a very small like group of people who can actually appreciate.
Yep. Yeah. And also, if you have to do a really crazy skill to impress people, someone with more style can always come along and show you up. Like, style is definitely the more important aspect if you're trying to impress other people, or if you're trying to have something that solicits a reaction. So I could always do a backflip, and then if a dancer comes up and does moves, I feel like they always win. They always steal the show.
So if you're at the wedding, we're in the wedding scenario, and you come out and you hook the backflip, you're like, oh, and then somebody answers up, and they basically lecture you through movement. Like, you clap back once, and they come out and just have this whole freaking like beef with you through footwork. You just like, you're not coming back out again.
We often say like that flips are like punctuation, they're exclamation.
They're exclamation marks.
So if you come out on the dance floor and you do a backflip, you're like, hey.
Yeah.
But if a dancer comes out, they're like, hey, what's up, man? How you doing?
Yeah, and they have like a whole.
What are you up to today? And you're like, hey.
You're like, hey. You're like, hey, I saw your backflip. It really stinks. Check out this footwork. See, I get all the looks. And then you're like, hey.
I do want to say too though, like
wait, are we even
it's
talking
it's
here?
like with kids when you like when you do a backflip, or you'll see kids and they'll like do a backflip, and then you do a backflip, and then what's the immediate next thing they say?
Double backflip.
Do a double, right? Because they're just not satisfied. Adults do that same thing.
Yeah.
If you're a parkour person and you do that, my favorite thing to respond to that, just like a little tip, is I don't work for free. And it comes off very pretentious, and I don't mean pay. What I mean is, if a kid comes up and says, do a backflip, I'm like, okay, cool, but you have to do a cool trick for me too.
Yeah.
And for them, their cool trick is like a cartwheel or something like that. But I think that's a beautiful way to stimulate some community, because every parent that I've done that like with their kid, where their kid's like, do a backflip, and I'm like, okay, I'll do a backflip, but you've got to show me a cool trick too. And they're like, I don't have any cool tricks. And I'm like, yeah, you do. And then they do like a cartwheel or something, and we celebrate, and then I do my backflip, and then they're like, do another one. And I'm like, but you know the trade. You have to show me another cool trick, right? That's an easy way, because I guarantee as a parkour person, you have far more tricks than a kid. You'll eventually shut them up. Like, I don't have any more tricks. But anybody else that's watching that interaction is going to look at you and parkour positively, and they're going to be like, oh, that was really cool. Like,
yeah, I mean, this is introducing like a movement as conversation, and this is something that people who do battles are really capable of already doing, and it's another way that you could have fulfillment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like if you have like b-boy, or if you have tricking battles, or if you have style battles as well, then you're able to not feel attacked by that, or you can enjoy it. It's like you were having the conversation. You weren't just trying to one up somebody.
Yep.
You weren't there for the audience. It becomes less about the audience and more about you. You're drawing them in and showing them your way of communicating, which is another great way to enjoy movement, or just training together is a good way too.
So, in summary, you have time. You have a window.
Yep.
You have time. But the focus needs to be on building the palette, the flat mountaintop, taking the time to enjoy the plateaus and look back at your accomplishment. Sit down, have a little breve.
Yeah.
You got a ways to go, but doesn't mean you can't enjoy and earn your progressions.
It's true.
Awesome, you guys. I love this one.
Cool.
It's good.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you next time.